I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
It took less than 60 seconds for an official statement to completely shatter the delicate sense of order inside the British monarchy. An announcement issued directly from the royal household confirmed that Prince Louis, the youngest son of the Prince and Princess of Wales, had suffered a sudden collapse during a private family rehearsal at Windsor. Within minutes, the young royal was transported for emergency overnight hospital monitoring, leaving the nation in absolute shock and pushing the royal family into one of its most emotionally devastating private crises in recent history. While official palace spokespersons carefully chose measured words to maintain public order, the fragile language could not hide the deep fear unfolding behind closed doors. Inside the hospital room, Catherine remained continuously at Louis's bedside, holding a small hand while the young prince struggled to comprehend why everyone around him looked terrified. Refusing to leave her son for even a single second, the Princess of Wales leaned close when Louis softly asked if he had somehow disappointed his family by falling ill, reassuring him that nothing in the world mattered more than seeing him safe and healthy. Meanwhile, Prince William stepped out into the hospital corridor to take an urgent call from senior palace officials. When an aide suggested releasing an immediate family photograph to reassure the public and calm mounting panic, William's composure completely snapped. He fiercely made it clear that his frightened, exhausted, and hospitalized son would never be used as a publicity asset to prove that the monarchy remained calm under pressure. The formal palace release confirmed that Louis was conscious and stable under close medical observation, but every scheduled public engagement for the Wales family was instantly suspended, setting duty aside as personal survival took precedence. However, the crisis deepened when a sealed medical report from family physicians documented 2 prior undisclosed episodes of sudden dizziness and extreme fatigue that Louis had quietly suffered days earlier. These hidden warnings revealed that his sudden collapse was not an isolated incident, sparking immediate, painful questions regarding who had known about his condition and why senior family members had not been notified sooner. King Charles received the medical report alone inside his private study, setting down his glasses and falling silent as the weight of the oversight became painfully clear. The king recognized that this was no longer merely a health concern, but a severe crisis of internal trust. When palace communication advisors attempted to debate media strategies, Catherine ended the discussion by placing her phone on the table, declaring firmly that Louis would not become a headline while he was scared. Though her words silenced the room, they could not erase the hidden decisions that had brought them to this fragile moment. To the global public, Louis was known as a spirited, joyful prince whose charming expressions brightened formal state occasions. But behind palace gates, he was simply a frightened boy trying to understand why his body had suddenly failed him. Back at home, George and Charlotte remained under the care of household staff who desperately tried to maintain normal routines. But Louis's empty chair at the breakfast table destroyed any illusion of normalcy. George quietly placed a handwritten note beside his brother's seat, promising they would finish their favorite game together as soon as he returned, turning away before Charlotte could see the tears in his eyes. Charlotte, having overheard staff whispering about emergency hospital tests, directly confronted her father, demanding to know why the truth had been kept from them. William chose his word with extreme care, realizing that shielding the children with silence had only amplified their helplessness. In the quiet hours of the night, Catherine recalled a troubling moment days earlier when Louis returned from school complaining of a racing heart and blurred vision, only to smile moments later and insist he was fine. That memory now weighed heavily on her heart, proving that the emergency had not arrived without warning. William learned through a recorded medical conversation that Louis had deliberately minimized his pain because he feared causing further trouble during a stressful year for his parents. The revelation deeply devastated William, knowing his young son had mistaken silence for kindness. When Louis softly apologized for forcing his parents to cancel their royal duties, Catherine assured him that no royal calendar or palace commitment was more important than bringing him home safely. Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, called directly to offer support, and when she asked if Catherine had slept at all, Catherine's silence spoke volumes. The collapse appeared sudden to the outside world, but inside Windsor Castle, a dark realization was taking shape that this health crisis had begun long before the official palace statement was ever released. Every major crisis inside a royal household has a single defining moment that later feels like an unmistakable warning. for the Prince and Princess of Wales. That moment occurred during a quiet, private chapel rehearsal at St. George's Chapel inside Windsor. 3 days before Prince Louis was rushed to the hospital, the family had gathered to prepare for an upcoming ceremonial appearance, an environment steeped in centuries of royal tradition and heavy duty. Louis had already endured an exhausting schedule of travel, school activities, and formal rehearsals. While several palace aides casually dismissed the young prince's visible fatigue as simple restlessness, Catherine's maternal instinct told her something was deeply wrong. Halfway down the chapel aisle, Louis suddenly lost his balance, stopped dead in his tracks, and reached out to grasp a heavy wooden pew. Pale and trembling, he whispered to his mother that the room was spinning, and that he could hear his own heartbeat loudly pounding inside his ears. Catherine immediately halted the entire rehearsal and demanded medical assistance on the spot. However, a senior household official hesitated, urging Catherine to move the child quietly to a private side room first, arguing that breaking off the practice too abruptly would spark immediate alarm among staff and leak to the press. When William arrived minutes later and discovered that medical personnel had not been summoned instantly due to protocol concerns, his restraint completely collapsed. He angrily confronted the official, demanding to know why preserving the appearance of calm was given higher priority than responding to a distressed and frightened child. The official attempted to explain the institutional procedures, but William cut him off, refusing to let protocol override his son's safety. Catherine knelt beside Louis in a quiet room adjacent to the chapel, softly asking him to describe every physical sensation he was feeling. It was then that the young prince made a heart-wrenching admission. The racing heart and blurred vision were not new, but had happened multiple times before. The shock on Catherine's face conveyed everything to William. This was not an isolated physical breakdown, but an ongoing medical issue that had gone unnoticed. The attending physician performed a thorough examination, documenting irregular symptoms and strongly advising immediate hospital testing. Yet, as his breathing stabilized, young Louis begged his parents to let him go home instead. Frightened by the prospect of doctors' hospital rooms and causing another major disruption during an already difficult year for his family, the young prince pleaded not to be the reason plans were canceled. That desperate plea broke his parents' hearts, revealing how deeply a young child had already internalized the pressure to remain silent and perform his public role. Despite the doctor's clear warnings, an official scheduling document revealed that palace coordinators kept the following day's public commitments active until Catherine personally stepped in and ordered every engagement involving her son to be canceled immediately. She made it crystal clear that royal duty would never outrank a child's life. William closed the doors, dismissed the aides, and made a solemn vow to Louis that he would never again be expected to hide his pain just because the world was watching. The discovery of how long Louis had been suffering in silence transformed William's grief into intense anger, which soon erupted into a fiery confrontation inside the palace walls. Entering a private sitting room where King Charles was reviewing documents, William placed the physician's detailed medical timeline directly on the table. The future king demanded an immediate explanation as to why statements, public image, and official protocol had been discussed by senior palace officials before anyone had even checked on Louis's emotional state. King Charles, taking offense at the accusation of indifference, pushed back, resulting in an intense clash between the weight of royal duty and the fierce instincts of fatherhood. Charles had summoned William after learning that the Wales household had withheld earlier details of Louis's symptoms from the Central Palace Communications Team, the senior division responsible for managing royal security and public messaging. The king believed a controlled, unified statement was essential to prevent wild media speculation from overwhelming the family. William, however, saw it as an icy institution treating his son's genuine suffering as a mere public relations threat. He fiercely accused senior officials of prioritizing the monarchy's reputation over a terrified child. Charles responded sharply, reminding William that he too was a deeply worried grandfather who had read the medical reports and feared the worst, but explained the immense pressure of managing public trust. Charles then revealed a disturbing detail. During an emergency briefing held prior to the official announcement, a senior advisor had recommended attributing Louis's collapse entirely to simple exhaustion, omitting any mention of emergency hospitalization or previous warning signs to quickly neutralize public panic. William then produced a handwritten note from Catherine, which explicitly rejected that sanitized narrative. Catherine insisted that the public statement must acknowledge a genuine medical emergency while strictly protecting Lewis's specific diagnosis, medical results, and hospital location. Her firm stance drew a clear line. While rumors could be dangerous, oversharing would forever strip her child's right to medical privacy. Seeing the intense emotion and trembling hands of his son, King Charles realized that William's fury was rooted in profound fear, not rebellion. The king softened his tone and agreed that Catherine's version of the statement would stand unaltered. Though the argument ended without formal apologies, the internal dynamic of the palace had permanently shifted. Catherine's quiet authority became the ultimate shield for her family. While officials debated media exposure and legal wording, Catherine remained steadfast at Lewis's bedside, ensuring motherhood remained above the royal machinery. When the communications team presented options ranging from complete secrecy to full medical disclosures, Catherine firmly ruled that no diagnosis would be named and no test details released. When Lewis softly asked her if people would think he was weak for being sick, Catherine gently took his hand and told him that asking for help and admitting pain was one of the bravest things anyone could ever do. By early morning, the immediate physical crisis began to stabilize, but the emotional ripple effects were rapidly spreading through every level of the royal family. Inside Windsor Castle, Prince Louis's empty chair at the family table stood as a poignant reminder how fragile their world had suddenly become. Scheduled appearances were postponed. Security procedures around both the residence and the medical facility were heightened, and private communications within the household turned tense. Yet, the most painful consequence was not the intense external media attention, but the quiet fear lingering in the voices of George and Charlotte. With their younger brother remaining under close medical observation, the household staff worked tirelessly to preserve daily schoolwork, meal routines, and familiar activities to give the young royals a sense of stability. However, the empty space where Louis usually sat destroyed any illusion that things were normal. George quietly placed a handwritten note beside his brother's plate, promising they would finish their unfinished game as soon as he returned, before slipping away into silence. The young heir withdrew emotionally, taking on the burden of remaining composed for his parents, politely answering questions while internalizing a profound anxiety every time a telephone rang. Charlotte, on the other hand, reacted with spirited frustration. Having overheard hushed adult conversations regarding hospital tests and medical assessments, she directly confronted Prince William, demanding to know why no one had explained how serious the emergency truly was. William carefully chose his words, recognizing that their intention to protect the children with silence had only made them feel helpless and excluded. Later that afternoon, Catherine returned briefly from the hospital to sit with George and Charlotte. Looking directly at her mother, Charlotte asked the devastating question that had been haunting her, whether Louis was going to be all right, or if he might never come home. The Princess of Wales took both of her children's hands, reassuring them with absolute honesty that while Louis's body needed dedicated time and rest to heal, the doctors were confident in his full recovery. She repeated the promise until George finally raised his head, acknowledging the deep fear hidden behind his quiet exterior. Later that evening, a documented medical update confirmed that Louis would require extended rest and a total suspension from all upcoming public duties. The family physician warned William that rushing the young prince back into formal ceremonial appearances on behalf of the crown could severely compromise his recovery. King Charles received the briefing and recorded a deeply personal, private voice message for his grandson. Setting aside his formal monarchical title, Charles told Louis that no royal ceremony required his presence, no public duty mattered more than his health, and that his only job was to rest and grow stronger. Playing the recording twice to ensure no lingering stiffness remained in his tone, Charles sent the message directly to William. Hearing the genuine vulnerability in his father's voice opened the path for an overdue conversation, one where monarch and heir would finally speak not as public figures managing an institution, but as two fathers bound by a shared love for a child. There were no official briefing papers, camera crews, or palace aides present when King Charles found William standing alone in a dimmed hospital corridor late that night. Staring out a window while Louis slept quietly nearby, William felt the immense weight of the past few days pressing down on him. For the first time since the crisis began, neither man brought up statements, public press releases, or official calendars. King Charles quietly admitted that his initial impulse to assert institutional control came from a place of deep fear because he felt powerless to fix his grandson's pain. William, in turn, confessed the overwhelming guilt he carried for having missed the subtle signs of Louis's distress, realizing that his son had smiled through his discomfort simply to avoid causing trouble. Charles shared a painful reflection from his own past, admitting how he had once allowed public expectations to overshadow personal family moments, and vowed that such a pattern would not be inflicted on this generation. The king granted William full, unquestioned authority to pause Louis's public engagements for as long as necessary, asserting that Louis belonged to his family long before he belonged to history. When Catherine found William beside Louis's bed a short time later, she noticed a visible sense of relief in his posture. He promised her that their children would never be taught to mistake silence for strength, marking a profound shift in how the family would navigate their public and private lives. Outside the hospital walls, public reaction to the official palace release was surprisingly empathetic. While the palace had anticipated aggressive media speculation, the public response shifted dramatically when a small child placed a handwritten poster outside the gates of Windsor Castle. Underneath the crude drawing or crown, the sign read, "Louis, being brave does not mean never being scared." The touching image quickly circulated across global news broadcasts, reframing the royal health crisis into a broader, compassionate conversation about childhood health and the fundamental right to privacy. The final official update brought quiet relief rather than dramatic headlines. Prince Louis was officially discharged from medical care to continue his recovery safely at home, with no fixed timetable for his return to public life. As William and Catherine walked alongside their young son upon returning to their residence, they carried forward a renewed commitment to protect their family's well-being above all else. Catherine watched Louis cross the threshold of their home and finally allowed herself a quiet moment of tears, not grief, but profound relief. Gathering George, Charlotte, and Louis together, William reaffirmed that no child in their home would ever need to hide pain for the sake of public appearances. King Charles formally backed his philosophy, approving a permanent structural review of expectations placed on young royals to ensure health education and emotional well-being strictly supersede ceremonial obligations. As Louis sat back down at the family table, picking up George's handwritten note with a smile, the family understood that this crisis had not weakened their standing. Rather, by choosing the child over the ceremony, the monarchy had reaffirmed its deepest sense of humanity,